We do have quorum to begin, so we've got a lot on the agenda, so I think we'll call the meeting to order. It's 2:02 p.m. A couple of housekeeping matters to anyone who accidentally joined at 1 p.m. Apologies, we just had a slight mix-up in timing. So if you joined at 1 p.m., sorry about that. It was a 2 p.m. start today. It happens. Reminder to keep yourselves muted during the meeting. This meeting will be posted, a recording of this will be posted on YouTube by tomorrow. And the final thing is we are looking at the potential of returning to in-person meetings, hopefully next year at some point. We'll play it by ear, continue to assess the situation, the numbers, and so on. So we'll see. I think we're all quite excited to get back together in person, but have to be safe. So for now, at least we have this technology that lets us get together. I'll start off by asking for any disclosures of interest. Great, seeing none, moving right along. Introduction of new business. We do have an addition to item number 6, and that's a memo. It has been posted online, a memo provided by the chief. So I'll need a motion to add that memo to agenda item 6. Could I have a mover? Moved by Javid, seconded by Jeff. All in favor? Excellent. And we also have the announcement of a new partnership or funding for a new partnership between London Police Services and ATLOSA. So if I could have a mover and a seconder to add that as new business at item 11, moved by Maureen, seconded by Javid. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Next item is minutes of the October 21st public meeting. Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve those minutes? Moved by Maureen, seconded by Javid. All in favor? And that is carried. First big item of the day, Deputy Chief Betts, you're going to be speaking to us about proposed changes to the Police Record Checks Reform Act and Municipal Act. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I'd just like to provide a bit of an awareness to the board with regard to this proposed change that the Ministry of the Solicitor General is looking at and sort of soliciting feedback from. And the reason I bring this to your attention is because there is potential financial impact to the London Police Service should this come to pass. So as you can see in the memo before you, the Ministry is examining and considering ensuring that background checks, and I'll use that term to encompass criminal record and judicial matter checks, as well as criminal record checks. So background checks for those seeking to engage in voluntary activities would be performed free of charge by police services. This is essentially to reduce barriers to those who choose to volunteer in the community. Absolutely great idea. However, it's not without some unintended consequences, and in this case, those consequences include a loss of revenue for the London Police Service and all police services that do perform this. As you will see, the amount or the impact on us financially it's not significant in that it's in the neighborhood of $10,000 and $9,000 really. However, what's not included in that is that the London Police Service recently engaged on a service improvement whereby instead of requiring members of the public to attend the police station to pick up that paperwork, we had transitioned to an online availability. The online availability comes at a cost, and we pay approximately $9.95 for each volunteer check that we upload to the portal for those who are obtaining volunteer background checks to pay. We pay that. We don't pass that on to the members of the public. So we charge $15 for a background check, really a nominal fee. However, we absorb $9.95 for each of those that we upload. The concern here then is that $9,000 has the potential to balloon from up to a maximum of about $12,000 on top of the $9,000. But we're talking roughly $21,000 a year. So although again, not a significant impact in terms of our overall budget, it is nonetheless an impact in terms of revenue for the organization that would be absorbed somewhere else. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that while performing these background checks for free, we're not doing other things. So there's an opportunity cost associated to the performance of that. So the recommendation here is just that the board considers submitting correspondence to the ministry to outline what these financial impacts are. This is something that all police services and police service boards are engaged with, just to provide them with that awareness. This change of policy on the one hand is fantastic. On the other hand, it has real implications for those agencies that are conducting the work. And should the board choose to pursue that, I'd be more than happy to help facilitate writing that correspondence to provide the necessary background information. Subject to any questions, that's the extent of my report.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Any questions or discussions? Jesse.
Thanks for the report. I certainly would support providing feedback to the ministry that if they'd like to make these record checks free to users, that the province could pay for the revenue and offset that, because I guess it's an easy thing to do. Just has to be paid by somebody, and it's going to either be paid by property taxpayers or user fee payers or provincial government. And as the province is initiating the change, it seems to me like the most appropriate source would be the province. So I think giving some feedback to them, I know we have a couple days before the deadline for comments. I think making the changes is a reasonable one, but I'd like to see the province pick up the cost for that. So I'm happy to move that and we give that feedback to the province.
Thanks, Jesse. Any other discussion? Questions to the Deputy Chief? Okay, so we have a motion, a proposed motion that we submit to the Minister of the Solicitor General that they need to figure out a way to cover the costs, or that they need to cover the costs if they're going to be passing this legislation. Jesse, is that correct? Great. Do I have a mover or a seconder for that motion? Javid, any further discussion? Great, all in favor? And that is carried. So Jennifer, you and perhaps Deputy Chief and I can coordinate getting that correspondence to the ministry by November 21st. Thanks. Perfect. Thank you all. Okay, the next very important item on the agenda is the issue of officer and community workload, or workload of officers and the community impact, and announcement of some redeployment. Chief Williams, if you wanted to speak to the memo that you've provided that has been posted online.
Thank you, Chair. I did submit the memo and I apologize for the late submission, but it should be before you. I spoke about the service demands placed on police and our staffing situation last month in public session and a number of times prior. The memo before you outlines some of the metrics which I've spoken about also, and also the decisions that have been made with relation to staffing changes to address these issues. You'll see that we've transferred members from key positions where they do important work back to patrol. Those positions are from virtually every area of the service. Let me first say that these are difficult decisions because all of the members who have been redeployed to patrol do valuable work for the community. Their work doesn't disappear, as you know, when they get transferred, so the impacts will be felt in other service areas. We believe that these changes are necessary to ensure the adequate and effective delivery of services. And really, when we talk about adequacy and effectiveness, because we use those terms a lot, it really just speaks to our ability to fulfill our public safety mandate along with public expectations, and also to ensure the safety of those who are actually doing the work, the frontline officers. There's no question that our response time was suffering. Holding calls in the queue for days is not acceptable, but the trajectory that we are on with relation to service demands could affect our ability to respond to emergencies in the community. And we know our emergency calls have increased over the last year, and these changes will help mitigate that risk. The trend we're seeing, and I can't stress this enough, also impacts officer safety. Firstly, the ability for officers to provide backup to one another when faced with dangerous situations on calls for service, often very unpredictable. I've spoken about this heightened volatility before. I've spoken about the increased prevalence of firearms and other weapons in the community. Our uniformed officers are seizing them at a rate that we have not seen before in this city. Those investigations are time consuming. They drive call time and response time. I've spoken about the increase in emergency calls, many of which involve multiple officers over an extended period. That drives response time also. But also there's the cumulative effect that these calls have on our members. Going from call to call, seldom without any break, is not healthy and it's not sustainable. Just like everyone else, officers need time to process and recover between stressful and traumatic incidents. They are not always getting that time. It wouldn't be uncommon, just to give you a quick example, for an officer to respond to an emergency overdose call, followed by a weapons call, followed by a domestic dispute with no downtime in between. And along the way, frequently fielding complaints about their response time. Yet when they arrive at the next call, they're expected to be composed and to control their emotions, which is often difficult. Officer burnout is real. I see it, I hear it, and I can feel it. We're often asked, how many officers do you have off on PTSD or due to occupational stress injuries? Like that's somehow a key metric, and it is an important metric, but we shouldn't be waiting until the officers are off duty to address this. There are people in our organization right now suffering from stress that may not manifest itself for some time to come. So these absences may accumulate down the road. So for all of these reasons, I do believe that these changes are necessary. I want to stress that we hope these redeployments are temporary, but I want to be clear that this is a step back as I see it. Using the core unit, our community-oriented response unit, as an example, and it's spoken to in the memo. The proactive and preventative work that they do, the ability to be nimble and to respond virtually anywhere in the city to chronic neighborhood issues is what we should be doing in policing in 2021, rather than just responding to calls for service. I don't think any of this should come as a surprise because we have historically talked and almost bragged about how lean we are at the London Police. We frequently cite statistics about cost per capita and police to population ratios. Those are important metrics, but these are not necessarily things to brag about. When we went through the multi-year budget in 2019, budget development, we talked about our staffing gaps. We talked about the risk to service delivery, and we talked about the risk of officer burnout. In an effort to move forward with the budget and recognizing and working with the board with relation to other municipal pressures, we did remove some sworn positions from the original submission. We flagged the risk at the time, and now I believe we're seeing that risk play out. So the memo outlines the plan. We do need to enhance our frontline staffing. We have a class attending the Ontario Police College in January. We are seeking positions through assessment growth, opportunities to keep up with the growth of the city, and we'll be having a hard look at our operating budget moving forward, and we'll work with the board on that. Of course, it's not all about staffing and budget. We are actively reviewing calls for service, and I speak about this in the memo, to revisit whether we even need to attend certain calls for service or what could be diverted to other agencies or simply not answered anymore. So we really have to turn off the tap. Ultimately, we know that many of these calls for service that we attend are driven by factors well beyond the control of the police. The police can't fix all societal problems, but we certainly want to be part of the solution and do our part. So I'm going to leave it at that, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions or discussion from the board? Jesse.
Thanks very much for the overview and the memo, Chief Williams. And I know you and the deputy chiefs and running the service has been doing great work to respond to what you're seeing out there. And I want to say I support the redeployments that you've made, even though something like the core unit, for example, I think it adds a huge amount of value, and it's really difficult to see them redeployed, even if it's a sort of semi-permanently, like temporary, but for a long time to frontline work. But it seems like it's necessary, and so I support doing it. I know you're going to keep a close eye on how things are going, and as soon as you could redeploy people back to their normal assigned functions, that you probably do that. But I just wonder if you could give us a sense, the kind of work that the core unit in particular does, and what people might, I guess, perceive being different once they're redeployed to frontline policing, because sometimes people mix up, what does the core unit do and what does the foot patrol do, and they sound like they're only in the core, but it's in fact just an acronym for community-informed response, community-oriented response. So I wonder if you could specifically what people might see day to day the difference there.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. It's a great question. So the core unit, community-oriented response unit, is not to be confused with the core area of London, the downtown. So we do get that confusion sometimes. So the core unit is a team of officers who are assigned to different zones within the city. So we divide the city into zones, and they have a responsibility to track chronic neighborhood type problems, crime, disorder in those areas. And then they work as part of a team to address whatever the issue is in a very proactive, problem-oriented way, hopefully getting ahead of the curve before it becomes a real neighborhood issue, before it gets worse. But one of the novel things about the unit is they do have, first of all, some analytical support. So we have analysts who can identify trends, and we can see, a crime and disorder trend while it's on the rise rather than once it's already hit the peak. So we can deploy in a very flexible, nimble manner to these issues, which is much more preferable versus responding to 911 calls after the issue has already gotten out of control, after somebody's in crisis or whatever the case may be. And, they have they put in such effort and work into developing relationships with, as a city councilor, with all the councilors in their respective wards, but also all the business associations, all the neighborhood associations. So I received a call yesterday from an individual who I quite respect, and I received information about something happening in his ward. He was a city councilor, and under normal circumstances, I could literally pick up the phone and have the core unit respond very quickly because they are nimble. They're not tied to the police radio. That capacity to do that is severely impacted. Some of these phone calls that I get or emails or whatever the issue comes to us, we'll have to go to the call queue now, and we'll have to wait for a dispatch. So that's not ideal. And it is a step back in policing. When the core unit was formed, it was seen as very progressive, and I want to get back there one day. But the reality is the 911 calls and the emergencies are unrelenting. And, we need to properly staff those emergencies and those other calls first. And, if we can get staffing where it needs to be and maybe turn off the tap a bit, as I alluded to, then hopefully we can move those core unit officers back. So basically we'll be more reactive, is to go back to your question, more reactive and less nimble.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Any other questions for the Chief or comments? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just through you, Madam Chair, to the Chief, in your report, it talks about like the same volume of calls, but taking much longer of the officer's time. So what's different now compared to last year?
That's a good question. I think I just refer in general to it being more complex, but first of all, I can say it's been building up over years, I would argue. But, I'll give a few quick examples. So, weapons calls. We absolutely get more weapons calls and firearm seizures and violent crime than we used to. And it's not just in London, it's in other jurisdictions as well. Those calls take a longer time to investigate. There's a great deal of, obviously, investigative work. There may be victims involved. There's certainly, if there's a firearm involved, there's some administrative tracing, things like that occur. There's evidentiary issues. It's complex. It takes time. There's reporting involved. You can't rush through it. Often there's a case to be prepared for court. There could be judicial authorizations, so search warrants, to search a vehicle, to search a residence, things like that. Mental health calls, the board is well aware. They are complex. They take a while to de-escalate. It's not as simple. Certainly we use our COAST team. They've been amazing. And there's other community resources that are doing their best. But so many calls that we may not even code as mental health have that undercurrent, right? They're driven by other factors. Somebody's in crisis for a reason. So, you know, those calls take a while to work through sometimes. And there's risk management. There's, you know, supporting victims and supporting witnesses. So I can't, you know, label one specific item, one specific task that's taking longer, but we know it's taking longer.
Just a follow-up, Madam Chair,
Mhm.
thank you. So, and I know you said it has been building over time, but did compare last year to this year, 2020 to 2021. Has it sort of exponentially grown in over the last 12 months? And do you think it's related do you think that sort of explosion in growth, if that has happened, is related to the pandemic in any way?
Well, certainly some of the, I don't actually have that, sorry, I have too many screens open, but I don't have my memo on the screen. But yeah, certainly there's been some exponential growth in, yeah, I think our code 1 emergency calls have gone up almost 30%, and our code 2 urgent, but not quite an emergency calls have really gone up. I think it's probably too simplistic to say the pandemic has caused this. It's probably a factor. I would argue there's multiple variables. The pandemic has affected people in ways we couldn't imagine. I'm probably not qualified to speak on this, but you know, there are mental illness, I'm going to suggest, has been aggravated by the pandemic and things that individuals and families are going through. And if there's concurrent issues with somebody related to you know, addiction or homelessness or substance dependency, whatever that is, it's going to be aggravated. So I think there are a number of variables that need to be considered, and you know, time will tell. Somebody will have to look back years later at 2019 to 2021 and do that assessment. But I can tell you the situation has changed for policing.
Thank you. So one just comment, Madam Chair, through you. I agree with everything that Councillor Helmer said. I agree that I'm supportive of this. And I agree that it's my hope that we can go back after a relatively short period of time to the more proactive policing that we were working on. From my own personal experience, the core unit was incredible. My office at City Hall often engaged the core units, asked them on behalf of constituents in Ward 5 to check out a situation, check out neighborhoods, look at ongoing problems, that sort of thing. And they were responsive and thorough, and everybody was always very pleased to deal with the core unit. So I'm sad to see the pause here in that, but I'm cautiously optimistic that soon we'll be able to get back to that. So thank you for the memo, and thank you for the information.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Any other discussion? Jeff, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm approaching the end of my term on the Police Services Board. It's been almost 3 years, and this is no surprise. We've been hearing about this. It was an issue when I came onto the board, and it continues to be an issue, and it's getting worse. With all due respect to the chief, I don't support reducing some of the programs and reallocation because it's a Band-Aid. And quite frankly, I believe our community deserves better than that. And more importantly, I think that our staff, that our frontline officers deserve better than that. This does not resolve the issue. To hear the chief say, you know, that we're going to be looking for more assessment growth positions hold the course. They add staff to cover extended service areas. That's what assessment growth is. Those are positions that hold us where we are. It doesn't solve the problem. And the issue that I see is that we have new policing challenges, but we have old attitudes about how we support the police. And it's not all about throwing money. I mean, we have to be efficient. But this is quite clearly a human resource issue. It's a deployment issue. And quite frankly, when we start measuring response times in days and weeks as opposed to hours, that's unacceptable. That is not an acceptable service level for our citizenry. We expect more, we demand more. So I'm a little disappointed that as a board, we support the reallocation. I support it on a temporary basis because we can do it right now, and it is going to take pressure off of some of our frontline workers and help alleviate that problem. But we need to get our heads around the fact that a great majority of the time, we're not meeting minimum service requirements. Minimum, and we're not meeting them. And that's not acceptable. Because as the chief said, when 3 officers call in sick on a shift, it doesn't mean the work doesn't get done. It just means it gets done by fewer people. And it's taking a toll. And the approach I would suggest, as the chief said, we can't be proud of the fact that we spend less on policing than any other community our size. Because we're getting what we pay for right now. And unfortunately, it's on the backs of our frontline workers. And it's on the backs of our community that expects better. Because as the chief said in the last public meeting, the victim that has the courage to call in a sexual assault, even though it's not happening at the time, it's a code 2, having to wait 4 days, that's not acceptable. And for the citizen that calls in a theft of a bike or other property, yeah, it's just a property crime. It's a code 3. We'll get to it when we get to it. But getting to it 10 days later? So, I have to push this back onto our city council because they're the ones that get these complaints. Councilors get the complaints from the citizenry. Now, sure, the police officers pay for it at the door, and that's not fair. They're doing the best they can. Our code 1 response times are second to none. Emergencies are being dealt with. But people of London deserve better than what we're giving them. And I think we need to have a different approach to how we look at policing in our city. And quite frankly, it's time to get caught up because I think we're behind. And reallocating and canceling programs that we know are beneficial to our communities. Our councillors know that the communities in which they serve enjoy these programs. There's a benefit to these programs. There's a direct result, a positive result from these programs, and we're seeing them go. And I see the way we're going now, there's going to be a lot more of this happening unless we change the way we think about this. And it's going to cost money. So I'm sorry to belabor this. I'm very engaged in this discussion because I think we're at a critical point. And I think it needs to be dealt with. And we need the support of our city councilors that sit on this board to communicate to their colleagues around that horseshoe that, we are facing different, this policing is different today. And we need to take a different approach at it. And we have a great relationship with the city. And I think now is a great time that we can deal with some of these issues and actually, instead of putting a Band-Aid on it, providing some solutions or at least a path forward where we see that we're going to get better, not worse. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Dr. Sakara.
This is my last board meeting, so it's hard for me to find the words because I might get a bit emotional. What I just don't want us to forget is that we are a community that has endured kind of unimaginable trauma in the past 12 to 18 months. And I don't want us to forget that because it takes a toll on everyone. It takes a toll on the dispatch person who's taking the call, on the community member who's worried about the revved engine, or the health worker who's worried about being assaulted because people are angry. We are living in a very different time, and we need to come together as a community to make sure that we all prioritize each other's well-being and safety. So it's sad that we're at this point, but we don't want it to get worse. So I'm hoping that my board colleagues after my departure will be able to be proactive, to intervene early in partnership with their administration, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I'm typically an optimist, and I hate to say that, but the signs aren't looking good unless we do something different. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Sakara. Anybody else? Councillor Cassidy.
Thanks. I just want to jump back in a little bit here just to say, personally for me, and I'm pretty sure it was the same from Councillor Helmer, that the support of this is just the support of the chief and the deputy chiefs in taking this interim step to get us past this crisis point. And as a board together working with administration, now our job going forward is to find a long-term solution for this. The deputy chiefs and the chief together have some very progressive attitudes and thoughts, a lot of education and wisdom around modern policing. And it's important that we tap into that knowledge and wisdom and move this forward and do policing differently in London, and continue to, as we already have been, continue to be an example of modern policing throughout Canada and the world, frankly. I would push back a little bit on the pressure put on two of the councillors sitting on this board right now. The city council as a whole deals with the budget that comes from the police board. And with great respect to board member Lang, who has been on this board for 3 years, city council can only deal with the budget that is presented to them. And so it is incumbent on this board to work together and work with administration and make our budget submissions such that they are able to provide the kind of policing that we want to provide in the City of London. And the only way we can do that is together. And that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Chief, the motion for this is to receive your memo, and I understand that certainly going forward, and particularly next year, we'll be readdressing this as a board. But is there anything at this moment that you think the board could do, any other advocacy work, or are you content just at this, and again, just at this moment in time for us to pass a motion to receive your memo?
Well, I mean, I thank you, Chair, and I have heard every single one of you who've spoken, and thank you. And I agree with various aspects. I just want to stress, one of my final comments was that this is interim, hopefully. We hope these are temporary measures. We want to restore the units that we've disbanded temporarily. Our plan is to seek additions to growth or additions to staffing, and I don't want to be any confusion about that. So we do have officers going to police college in January. We are seeking officers through assessment growth, but as Mr. Lang pointed out, some of that is for growth of the city, and some of it, quite frankly, is for attrition. Officers are retiring because of this 30-year bubble, which is sort of coming due now. So we are seeing a lot of officers just retire. So we have challenges simply around attrition, but we will continue to look for the efficiencies, and we look for efficiency all the time. So I always kind of I always take it with a grain of salt when I'm asked to look for efficiencies. We look for efficiencies, but the City of London will get the police service that they want, that they pay for. I mean, like any municipal service. And if we want a full service police department that does proactive, progressive work, such as the core unit, and we want to keep on top of the workload and provide a decent response time. And let's not forget the welfare of our officers. because this is done in the back of the officers. So day in, day out, seldom any breaks, 10, 12-hour shifts, 5, 6 days in a row. That has an effect. So I do think a year from now, we will be talking about amendments to the 4th year of our operating budget, the 2023, if not sooner. But that doesn't negate the fact that we're gonna look for those calls for service that maybe we can defer to another agency or somehow handle in an alternate manner. So there's lots of items on the table there. There's lots of work to be done. I hear all the comments. I appreciate all the comments, and I'm probably rambling, so I'll stop there. But I think the memo speaks for itself, and I'm sure we'll have further discussions.
Thank you, Chief. Could I get somebody to move that we receive the Chief's memo? Moved by Dr. Sakara, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. All in favor? Oh, sorry, hold on. Further discussion? Councillor Helmer.
Yeah, I was just taking in what Mr. Lang said, thinking about how I wanted to respond. I guess what I would say at this point is those of us who are only on the police board and don't have responsibility for the overall city budget as well, I think it's actually quite easy to say, you guys go and get us more money from the city. And we as city councillors and the mayor, we have to decide between, should more money go into homelessness prevention or community housing or immigration services or Ontario Works or any of the many other services that the city is offering. And frankly, a lot of those services are under extreme stress too. And so it's not as simple as just saying, well, we'll just take money from somewhere else. And it's not, as people know, so easy to just say, well, we'll just increase taxes on everybody to pay for it. The police budget has gone from $43 million a year in 2002 to $121 million now. That's a 177% increase. Now, it's a long period of time, but it's gone up faster than basically anything else. So I'm not convinced that the solution is we just need more money, more people, more money, right? Because that's what we mean when we say more money is all the budget's going to people. That's what we need more of. And so we're saying we need more money. And I'm not convinced of that. I think, we, especially at the city level, forget us as board members, at the city level, we have to be thinking, why are these problems happening in the first place? The chief is talking about turn off the tap, right? Like stop all these calls coming in, like the intensity of the calls, the severity of the calls. Is that really affected by the number of police officers who are out there? No. It's affected by all the things that are not police. Why are those calls happening in the first place? And so it's not like we need to just do one thing, right? It's not, and I'm not saying that no increases in resources are reasonable or needed, but I don't think it's quite as simple as just saying we just need more, right? It's how do we change the overall response? How do we do things upstream of the problem so that they are avoided? And my concern with what's being done now, I think it's necessary, but taking away the proactive piece, right, or that the core unit is doing, it's going to, and we know, and this is the frustrating part, the problem that's already there. Similarly, if we're to take resources away from some other area that the city is funding, that's helping prevent some of these problems from happening in the future that require police response, we're just going to make this problem worse, right? So, the police budget is always a difficult thing to discuss at City Council. Last time, it was frankly not very difficult at all. And I think we have, as a board, have to work through how are we going to prioritize the investments. I've looked back at the assessment growth positions that we have passed and received in the last little while. A lot of those positions were civilian positions, right? And I think they're necessary. I was convinced that those were good positions to put forward for assessment growth. Do we want to be doing that in the future? Maybe not so much. I think we have cut, and I will say, there was a period before I was on council where there were very severe cuts to the police budget. And at the time, you know, I had a really hard time, and we ended up going to the OCPC for a hearing because we just had the year before saying from the chief, it's fine, we can cut down to this level and it's going to be okay. And then the next year it was like a crisis. And it didn't make sense to me. I'm like, how is it fine then and it's not fine now? And now I've actually had the benefit of being on the board now for a while. I understand now how these things can happen. That was a mistake back then. Those cuts, that level of cut back down to where we got to. But we've been adding positions every year, right? And we're still in this situation, right? So I just wanted to say this is really a complicated thing. And we at the city, like just speaking as a city councilor, we have to be doing a bunch of different things and not just attending to the needs of the police service only. And so that's a tough spot to be in. Like that's the job we signed up for. It's not easy. We're in the middle of budget now. And I appreciate that people are going to come at it from different angles, but I'm not convinced that just adding more to the same model is actually going to solve the problem.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Just in interest of time, I would like to move on. Jeff, can you say what you want to say in about 20 seconds or less?
Well, Chair, I would like to respond to what
Okay, just
Councillor
keep
Helmer
it short,
said.
okay?
Well, I'll try. The fact that that I only sit on the Police Services Board discounts an awful lot, I think, and it's a little belittling. I have a great appreciation for what city councilors have to do in managing their budget. I'm involved with managing a $40 billion budget on another board that I sit on. And I know these decisions aren't easy, and you have to say no. But the reality is that this is a problem that is going to cost money, whether the city likes it or not. And if city council thinks that the level of service we're providing our community right now from the police service and the way that our officers are being stressed is acceptable or can be resolved without additional funding, I would really like to hear what it is. I'd really like to hear what it is. I understand that there's a lot of issues that council has to deal with. We're talking about the police service right now, response times and the service we deliver to the community. And it's not acceptable. So I hope that city council, and I hope that we as a group can work together. But I think we have to look at this differently than we've looked at it in the past. And it's not all about the dollars and cents. It's about actually achieving something and making a difference. And that might cost money. So I just wanted to respond because I don't think that this is just thrown into the city budget discussion, because it's not a city budget discussion right now. It's about the police services. It's about our frontline workers and about the service we deliver to the community. And I think that's what we need to be talking about, not the police, not the overall city budget and all the woes of society right now, because we're not going to solve a lot of those. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Lang. So we had a mover and we had a seconder, and we were in the middle of the vote. So I'm just going to ask for everyone to vote in favor of receiving that memo from the chief. All in favor? Excellent, and that is carried. Thank you so much for that discussion, everybody. Next up, we have an update on the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel. I'll keep it quick. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cassidy.
With apologies, I do have to leave now, Madam Chair, so I will take my leave.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. The Anti-Racism Advisory Panel, we met on October 26th. The big update there is, as you may be aware, we did feel as a panel that we had one significant gap in our lived experience and expertise around the table, and that was that we did not have an Indigenous member in the group. So I'm pleased to report that we believe that is going to be changing. Hopefully I'll be able to provide an update either at the December board meeting or January board meeting. So I just wanted to share that with the group. Do we need, Jennifer, do we need a motion for that to be received? No, we're good. That's just an update. Okay, thank you. Dr. Sakara, you're going to be sharing your very last monthly update on the Mental Health and Addictions Advisory Panel.
Thank you. So the advisory panel met last week. We are still working on really identifying what the priorities are for work for the year ahead. There is a new co-chair, Christine Geringer, along with Kristen Legault. Because of my departure, Christine Wellenreiter will be stepping in as an interim co-chair, so the group will be solid. There was a lot of discussion about prioritizing people who are vulnerable and suffering in terms of the police response, utilizing and leveraging the panel to support the needs of LPS around training and education. So I'm hopeful and optimistic about some exciting updates ahead from the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sakara. Next up, we have some public correspondence. For those of you who don't know, there's a lot of background work that goes on between the Big 12 police services in Ontario and as well as our umbrella organization, the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards, that often include advocating for various greater services, funding, and so on. So in the agenda, you'll see 3 letters that have been drafted with input from our police services board and input from other police services board that include a letter from the Big 12 that London Police Services Board is part of to the OAPSB, another letter from the OAPSB, our umbrella organization, to the Minister DeBolo, and correspondence as well to the Solicitor General. And we have a final email. As you may be aware, last meeting we had the Inspector of Policing join us. It was a fantastic meeting with him, so we sent him correspondence thanking him for joining us last week. Can I just have somebody move that we receive those letters for informational purposes as part of public correspondence? Moved by Dr. Sakara, seconded by Christine. All in favor? Excellent, and that is carried. Next up, Deputy Chief Betts, you're going to walk us through a verbal update with respect to a towing contract, which we know has come before the board several times over the past year and a half.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I am providing an update to the board to announce that the award of the police towing contract has gone to Ross's Towing for a period of 3 years with an option to renew for an additional year. That process followed our established practices and followed in accordance with the board's procurement policy. So in May of 2021, a request for proposal was drafted and reviewed. And in June, it was posted on bids and tenders, as is our process and in accordance with our practices. That bid remained open for a month, or actually more than a month, and we received 1 respondent, Ross's Towing. The response was evaluated in August, and the terms of that contract were finalized in September and awarded in October, presented to you here now in November. That contract will start on January 1st, 2022. Now, I want to ensure that it's very clear that this contract is for the purposes of impounding vehicles for police-related investigations or is directed by legislation. So for greater clarity, what that means is it's for things such as vehicles seized as a result of an impaired investigation or vehicles impounded in relation to criminal investigations in which the vehicle is required for evidentiary purposes. For those instances when a motorist is broken down or has been involved in a collision, it will be the registered owner or the operator of that vehicle that decides what tow provider they will choose to use. LPS officers will not be recommending or influencing those decisions. That is somewhat of a departure from what our current contract states. We recognize that making such a decision for those folks in those circumstances can be a challenge, and people may feel vulnerable in those situations, especially if they've not had to make a request for a tow before. Therefore, we will be leveraging the good work of the city and their licensing provisions. The city has developed a very helpful, I'll call it a bookmark or a pamphlet, that our LPS officers and dispatchers will have. It includes a QR code for motorists to scan and be directed to the city's website for up-to-date lists of licensed tow providers and impound providers in the City of London. It has other useful information as well. And while it's not our place to champion the hard work of the city, We would be remiss if we did not acknowledge that in undertaking this task of licensing, it does provide that measure of consumer safety and public safety for everybody who needs to engage the services of a towing provider. This contract, as I said, takes effect January 1st, 2022, and all LPS procedures will reflect this new direction on that date. Again, just to be clear, this contract's for the purposes of impounding vehicles for police-related investigations or directed by legislation. Subject to any questions, that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Chief. Any questions for the Deputy Chief? Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder that we receive for informational purposes that verbal update with respect to the awarding of the towing contract to Ross Towing, please? Moved by Dr. Sequeira, seconded by Mr. Lang. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you again, Deputy Chief. Okay, we have one item of new business. I mentioned at the top that we were just announcing that we have received funding to create a partnership. So I wanted to give a little bit more detail, and I'll ask Deputy Chief McIntyre as well to provide some details. But essentially, we've received funding to enter into a partnership between London Police Services and Atlosa Family Healing Services to commence an initiative that's going to give voice to Indigenous survivors of intimate partner violence and human trafficking. Deputy Chief McIntyre, maybe you can give us a little bit more details about that funding. I think this is a really extraordinary program.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, you said it really well. A special thanks to Inspector Cherney, who's on this call, and his team, really for their work in drafting this grant and this funding opportunity that's coming to London Police Service. So what it is essentially is a funding opportunity that partners London Police with Atlosa to really drive a training initiative. So through that, the agreement resulted in $125,000 of provincial funding. So it allowed Atlosa to contract services with an Indigenous facilitator to interview Indigenous survivors and learn from their experiences, but at the same time recognizing that really we owe them to teach us continually on what to do better. And so there's an honorarium that's built in that really tries to say on a monetary level, thank you again for teaching, and then allows us to use that information and the lessons learned through their experiences, both good and bad, to be better. And that isn't just used by the police, but rather the Crown Attorneys, Victim Services, really driving that cultural competency to allow us to drive excellence in our response to these types of situations. So again, special thanks to Inspector Cherney, and I'm excited to see the results and learn. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chief McIntyre. Does anyone have any questions for Deputy Chief McIntyre about that? I just want to recognize again how extraordinary it is that in this particular situation, we are not going to be asking these survivors for free labor. As Deputy Chief McIntyre mentioned, there will be quite a substantial honorarium for them sharing those stories, because that's obviously a very difficult thing to do. And so I'm very, very pleased to hear that we are going to be providing that as a way of saying, you know, we need to do better, and we're going to make sure that we pay you for your expertise so that we can become better. So thank you. And Inspector Cherney, I'm glad you were here for part of that, because the board was discussing this earlier, and we're all really, really pleased with this program and the training that's going to come out of it. So thank you as well. Okay, we're nearing the end of our meeting. For everyone to know, the next Finance Committee meeting and the next full Police Board meeting is going to be Thursday, December 16th. So I'll see you all then. But before we adjourn this meeting, you may have heard already that today is Dr. Sequeira's final Police Services Board meeting. His 3-year provincial term is coming to an end December 11th, so right before our December meeting. So today is going to be his last meeting. He will technically continue to be a board member until the 11th, but this is the last time you'll see him in this context. David, before we found out that you were going to slip and injure yourself and had planned to return to Connecticut, we had ordered a lovely gift basket for you that may be arriving to your house in the States right now. So hopefully it will be there when you get back. So that was our intention. But I know that there are people here who want to take some time to make some comments. I'm going to open it up to the board and to the chiefs to see if anybody wants to say anything. I know this is something the mayor specifically asked for as well last time. So who wants to start? Chief, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Javid, I really just want to say thank you for your leadership and support over the last several years, and for much of that you were chair. I've witnessed the way you've gone about doing business with the board and with the administration, and you're always very thoughtful and considerate, and you really do listen to people. We may not always agree on things, and that's probably good. But it strikes me when there's a motion on the floor, there's a topic before the board, and it's going around for discussion, you're usually one of the last to actually weigh in. And I think that just illustrates, your ability to actually listen and consider, and your thoughtfulness. So you bring your professional life and your personal experience into the decisions. And I know you've been of such great assistance to us in the development of the COAST program, for example. I know you did a lot of behind the scenes work, even if it was just providing advice and some guidance. It was so appreciated, and into other policy decisions as well. So I really appreciate that. I have learned from you in that respect. So thank you. And just on behalf of Stu, Trish, and there's a bunch of other members on the call, on behalf of all of us, congratulations on your new opportunity down south. And we wish you and your family the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Chief. Mr. Lang.
Javid, I'm sure when you took on this huge responsibility, you weren't expecting to have to deal with the issues that you dealt with. And I have to say that you've dealt with the George Floyd and Black Lives Matters, the pandemic, the terrorism in London last summer, the issues that the police service deal with every single day. You've been a consummate professional. You've been compassionate, and you've been very, very eloquent in how you've dealt with these issues. And I think you've added an awful lot to this board. You'll be sorely missed. Your perspective is always, for me, is always highly valued. So I hope that you do extremely well. I know you'll do extremely well. I wish you and your family all the best. And again, your seat will be very difficult to fill.
Christine.
Yeah, certainly. Javid, you were the first, I think, first person of contact when I joined the board in 2020. And I think similar to what the others have said, that professionalism and measured, balanced approach has just really served as a role model for me. And it hasn't wavered. It hasn't wavered from first point to today. So it's that's really set the bar high for me in terms of how we can approach and work together on difficult matters, no matter where we are, in terms of bringing people together, and as the chief mentioned, that listen first approach has really been a lesson well learned for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Anybody else? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. Well, Javid, I'm going to miss you a lot. And I have to say, I really learned a lot from you about how to approach governance generally, and not just on the police board. I think you've done a really good job chairing. You stepped into the role at a very difficult time. The world around us got a lot worse right after you became chair, and you were, I think, dealing with things that we could never have really foreseen. and you carry a particularly heavy burden, and I want to recognize that. But I think you also brought a really needed perspective to many of the most difficult issues that we're dealing with. And that's where I think, my own learning, my own understanding has really improved through conversations with you, from listening to the discussions around the board table, how you work with administration and the LPA and the board, try and navigate all the difficulties of chairing a police service board. And I want to say you did a really good job. I think sometimes it can go unsaid or not said often enough that you've done an exemplary job as the chair of the London Police Services Board, and we're going to miss you, not just as the chair, but as a board member. I really hope the province has got a really great person to take over for you, and I know we'll be in touch through other means, but I'll miss you on the board table.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Who else would like to say?
A few words?
Not yet, Javid. Not yet. We're not done with you. Jennifer, I know you wanted to say a few words.
Hi, I had a lot of the same thoughts as everyone here, but just want to add my perspective as somebody who probably talked to Javid the most in his 2 years on the board. Lots of phone calls, lots of emails. Anyway, first of all, what a couple of years you chose to be chair. No one told you to buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride, because we did not know. And I'm glad you didn't know, because maybe you wouldn't have taken it on. But you navigated the turbulence with remarkable calm and grace, and that's what I love. I'm not a calm person, and I always felt calm after talking to you. So that is amazing. Despite your very busy professional life and having a young family, you always made time. And I don't know how you did it all. You made time for what the board needed, what I needed, what the community needed, and you personify the adage that who gets the most work done is the busiest person. So that really was amazing, and I've appreciated your support in doing all the work for the board. And I've also, like our colleagues have said, I've learned so much from you, and I look at things a little differently than I did before, just different issues. So I really appreciate that, and I will carry that forward and wish you all the best. Got great things ahead. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So I'm gonna jump as well, and then yes, Javid, we'd love to hear from you as well. I'm not sure exactly where to start. I've had the privilege of working with you these past few years, and if I have one regret with respect to my time on the board, it's that I didn't volunteer to be chair before you. Because listen, it's bad enough to follow in the footsteps of Mosa Lee, but to follow in his footsteps and then in your footsteps has been an incredibly gargantuan task. So I don't thank you for that. But I want people to know, I don't think people know how much work you put in behind the scenes, and how much you deeply and truly and sincerely care about the community and about every single member of LPS, and how much you prioritized officer well-being, as well as Chief mentioned, your work on the COAST program. And you contributed so freely of your expertise and your knowledge, your thoughtfulness. And I also know how much vitriol and hate that you also had to tolerate in the time. And I know you don't talk about it very much because you try to prioritize the positive, but I've seen it, and I've seen you hold your head high, even when you were subjected to vicious attacks. And I'm going to really miss the phone calls that we had where we shared our grief over the tragedies that have occurred over the last couple of years, shared our rage over the injustices of the world. I really valued those talks, and I know they'll continue, and I look forward to that too. But you've really become a very good friend, and I've loved working with you. And I am constantly in awe of your presence and your compassion, and how you invite such vulnerability while also being such a strong and tough person. But you have this real gentleness and this real ability to hold space for vulnerability that I think is really extraordinary. And you really walk the walk, you know, and a lot of people talk and say the right things, but I've seen that you act on those words. I feel like you really do represent the very best of us. And I'm really happy for you. I really am. I know that you're valued now, and it's wonderful what you're going to be able to achieve in your new role. But we and I am really going to feel your loss, not just for the board, but the community. And this sounds really cliche. Oh my God. But you really are an inspiration to me. And I'm very, very happy to call you friend. And I'm going to miss you a lot. That's it. Going to try to get through that without getting emotional. But this is your fault for holding space for that vulnerability. So I, in fact, blame you. But I'd love it if you wanted to say a few words. Please do so.
I'll try to keep it brief because I inadvertently fractured my elbow and I'm in a bit of pain at the moment. But I just wanted to first of all recognize you, Chief. It's been such an honor to get to know you, and you kind of exemplify the leadership that policing needs right now. Someone who's not afraid to have difficult conversations and someone who's staunchly committed to the service, to the community, and the well-being of your members. Susan, none of this was possible without you. From our first conversation to today, you are an inspiration to me as well. And you're a colleague, you're an ally, you're a co-conspirator, but you're also a role model for all of us. This whole experience for me has been such a gift. There's no greater honor than being able to serve one's community. And I've learned a lot. I think I've, above all, rediscovered the power of my own voice. I've learned how to stand tall in that power. And I was reminded to be deliberate and unafraid to bring my full self to everything I do. I know we live in a very messy world. But in this context, I have something to say to anyone who's seeking to bring change to the complex problems that are around us. The easiest and most useless thing that you can do is to whine about it. That's not activism. That's not going to make things better. Change requires hard work. It requires stretching out your hand with an open heart, especially when you're tempted to just clench your fist or point your finger instead. Change starts by looking in the mirror at yourself and embracing your imperfect self. Change happens when we embrace our power and when we embrace our vulnerability and we admit to one another that we're just all flawed and striving to be better. We can do it, we will do it, and we were never meant to do it alone. So thank you so much and all the best.
Let me start by muting myself. Thanks again, Dr. Sakara. Best of luck in your future. Please keep in touch. Hopefully you'll fly back to Connecticut at some point and get that lovely basket. Let us know. And that's it for this meeting. Again, next meeting is December 16th. I hope everyone will join us for that meeting. And until then, I just need someone to move to adjourn this meeting. Moved by Dr. Sakara and seconded by Christine. All in favor? And that is carried. Thanks again, everybody, for the meeting. Thanks for contributing. And thanks again, Dr. Sakara, for everything. And I'll see everybody in about a month. Take care. Stay safe.